All right, well, it's a new week in our class, June 11th through the 16th. And it's good to be back in town. We were in the Badlands last week. Quite the crazy weather and some fun adventures with the family. But glad to be back, getting back into the swing of things. So it looks like I was able to review all the work that you did last week and also to check that you got exam scores and so forth. I made sure those were entered in the gradebook now, and so we can move forward. This week's topic is survey and correlational research, and so we have those two different chapters that you'll read, chapters 7 and 8, one on survey, one on correlational research. So just a little primer about these. Survey research is the type of research where you send out a questionnaire to people and ask them to fill it out. And usually survey research asks them to fill out something that shows their opinion on some matter or their feelings about something. Correlational research, on the other hand, is research that collects data from two different sources and attempts to excuse me, my allergies are getting to me this summer. It's been so dry. Hopefully this rain we've got is a lot better for us. Correlational research, though, by contrast, you collect two different sources of data and then you correlate those, or basically tell whether those have some relationship. The trouble with correlational research that I think new people have a hard time understanding is that it does not mean causing. So let's say you collect data on, the school attendance and grades. You collect data on school attendance and also on students' grades, and you correlate, hey, students who attend school more get better grades in school. Well, that makes sense, but it's only a correlation, meaning that maybe the cause, or maybe not the only cause, is attendance for good grades. Maybe there's other causes as well. So you can only talk about how there's a relationship, not necessarily a cause and effect, when you think about correlational research. So that's what you're going to do, read those chapters, and then there's this in-text citations and references discussion. You're going to get a practice on doing some references and making sure to cite those properly with APA formatting. And you can follow a lot of examples in doing this. You'll find examples under general class items here, sample papers. You can use your APA book that you have for this class. The APA book tells you about how to cite, how to do in-text citations and also references. So that will help you to get started on that discussion. You're just going to pick an article and cite it. You're going to do the quotation, and you're also going to do a paraphrase or summary from an article. Those are different. And then for your responses to other students, and you'll also include the reference to the article that's APA formatted. And then for responses to other students, you're going to try to check their APA formatting to determine if it is correct and make suggestions to them. And then finally this week is due the preliminary research or preliminary literature review. So that's due this week. You need 7 to 10 sources for that. Logically organizing or categorizing, I should say organizing these studies. So let me just change that real quick. I think organized is a better word for that. It's APA formatted narrative writing. Writing flows logically, systematically, and 7 to 10 sources. So remember, as I talked about this, how to do this assignment, that was in last week's video. So if you want to look under June 4th through the 9th, there's a section on getting ready for the preliminary literature review in order to help you do that. But just taking a look at some of the example pre-literature reviews down at the bottom. So down at the bottom of this page, we have a couple of example ones that scored fairly well in the class. Did a really good job. Didn't get 100, but that's pretty rare. So if you notice, I just wanted to point a few things out about these examples. They do follow APA formatting for the running head as well as the titles and so forth, and so take a look at that. Although that's not something that I focus on so much yet. But if you look here, usually there's some kind of opening paragraph. It may have some citations, it may not. But this is kind of your own, writing about what you're going to be talking about. So again, the preliminary literature review and literature reviews need some kind of organizing and transitional sentences and explanations from you. It's not just going to be what the literature says, although that should be the main focus of the preliminary literature. It's also your own writing saying that studies have been done about this aspect of my problem or my area. So, and you give some information to the reader to organize what you're going to be talking about and say, we're going to first talk about studies that are about this, then we'll discuss this and that. So it's good to have these kind of introductory and summary paragraphs to help organize the literature review. Excuse me. So now we have the actual review. You'll notice how it's cited. It cites these different things using the right APA formatting, which you'll need to use as well. It has some nice headings, which I think are a good idea. So studies have been done on independent reading with student choice, and it's going to talk about those studies. You know, what were the focus of the studies or findings from those studies on independent reading and student choice. Then what were the findings of studies on directed independent reading. So it doesn't organize them by study. It doesn't say Smith did a study on this. Now Johnson did a study on this totally unrelated thing. No, what you should do is you should organize all of your studies according to their focus or their findings and put them together. So you could say something like this: Smith did a study of this and found this, and similarly Johnson also did a study on independent reading in the high school classroom and found similar findings here. Also similar you're relating the studies together that most relate to each other. You're putting them together close in your paper that most relate to each other. So remember to do that. And then if you look too, at the beginning of a section there is kind of a organizing or transitional statement, and maybe even at the end there's a transitional or organizing statement saying, okay, here's what this section talked about, and then here's what this section will talk about, or here are the things that we're going to be talking about in this section. And then there's also a conclusion, and some of the conclusion, not all of it, but some of the conclusion is the student's own work. One thing I should mention too is that you really, in a literature review and in all academic writing for this class pretty much, you probably wouldn't mention I or me or I looked at these materials or I did a search for these. The reader doesn't need to know that you did a search on Google Scholar or on ERIC, the academic databases or whatever. Just tell us what you found. You don't say, I did this process and I couldn't find anything, therefore I went to here. That's not part of a literature review. The literature review really is on the literature itself. So even if you're adding your own paragraphs about a literature review and saying what is in the review, just focus on what's in the review, not what I could find or what I did or my feelings on this. This is not about your feelings or about your own experience finding these things. This is just about what's in the literature. And so instead of saying I found these things, you would say instead there are studies that focus on children with difficult behaviors in the classroom. Some of these studies are organized in this way. Other studies are organized in this way. You're talking about the studies, not about yourself or your own experience. Excuse me again. A lot of allergies. Hopefully you don't have allergies like I do this summer. All right, so that's just an intro to the literature review. You can also read the teacher mentoring one. It's a good example as well. So that gives you a couple of examples to look at. But by the end of this week, make sure you do submit that preliminary literature review, and don't forget to submit it as a PDF file. That means you have to go to Word. Let me open up Word here real quick. I'm just going to type in a file here. You have to go to File and then Save As, for a Mac anyway. I think Windows is very similar. And then choose PDF, and then you'll save it as Lit Review or something like that. And then save it as a PDF, and that's the file. When it makes the PDF, that's the file you upload to me. And the reason why I have to have you do that is because I can't do that for you. It won't let me put things in the Dropbox for you. And if I do have that PDF, then I can go through on my iPad and kind of mark it up and make an underline on something, circle something, write a note on something if it's a PDF formatted paper. So make sure you submit that as a PDF. Just a little bit more on survey research. So I do a lot of research that would probably be considered survey research in my own experience as a researcher. And here's one example of a survey. I really like Google Forms. This is a great tool for collecting data from a variety of people in a really quick and easy way. So here's an educational technology confidence survey that I combined a couple of different things to create, and it goes through, and here's an example of a survey instrument. So it gives a little information about the research study and begins here, and then it asks for the elementary school in which you teach. This was for elementary schools in the Aberdeen School District. And the number of years teaching experience, grade that you currently teach, your age, your highest degree earned. And the reason why we collect some kind of general data on surveys generally, we'll collect this demographic is what we call it, data, is because we want to take this and maybe correlate it with the findings from later on in the survey. So in other words, I could take elementary school teacher, for instance, and I could see if teachers from C.C. Lee Elementary answer more confidently than teachers from May Overby, for instance, just for an example. And actually I was looking at Mike Miller teachers in this case to see if they answered a little bit differently than teachers from other school districts, or none yet, I'm an NSU student. I wanted to see if they, of course, being my students, answered a little differently on some of the questions later on than current elementary teachers. So here's the self-efficacy for technology integration scale. This is a common type of survey as well. You have questions with answers like strongly disagree, disagree, neither agree nor disagree, agree, and strongly agree. And that's a Likert scale. It's basically what they call that, where you have a strongly disagree down to strongly agree, and people can respond in what way they want to, and they're supposed to respond as honestly as they can. So then you have questions again, strongly disagree, strongly agree, and that type of thing. We've had a lot of people fill this out. It looks like 134 so far. And I've actually published, well, we're getting to the publishing process anyway, hopefully close to publishing this article about our findings from this experience. So that's just one tool you can use to create surveys. A lot of people have used SurveyMonkey. That's pretty common as well, but I think Google Forms is a nice one. To use Google Forms to create questions, you just hit this plus button here, and it gives you a placeholder question, and you can enter in the question that you want to ask people. Now this probably would not be a real survey question, but you can then enter in all of the different Likert scale items. Whoops. Usually it's neutral, I think, but the instruments that I was using said neither agree nor disagree. Which, and yeah, I honestly think that neutral doesn't tell you much. Sometimes I'll make people say slightly agree or slightly disagree so that they're at least on one side or the other of the equation. So it's pretty easy. You just enter in the information, and then to send this out you can just hit the send button here and give people a link. Or you could send it by email to get people to fill it out. So it's just a nice tool. Again, an example of a survey tool. I'm going to delete that new question. And as they fill it out, it's actually kind of interesting to see the responses. It will give you all the different pie charts of all the different responses that people responded with, as well as bar charts for the Likert scale items. And also you can click this spreadsheet item and it will create a spreadsheet from the findings and give you those so that you can crunch the numbers statistically. And that's what I did with these. I took some of the responses and I compared teachers in elementary schools with Northern State University students, and to see how they responded differently to these questions. And then based on the experience that they had experienced, I talked about how that would, the reasons why that would be the case. So just a little more on survey research. We'll talk about statistical analysis later in the class briefly. I think we don't get a chance to cover it in much depth. But that is the activities for this week. Hopefully you feel ready to go, and good luck completing those for this week. Have a great week.